Yeah, I'm Jo Barnard. I've been a wellbeing therapist for 15 years now, and really choosing in recent times to specialise in trauma and anxiety, because I believe there's a huge need for it. Not just I believe, I know there's a huge need for it. And my recommended treatment for most people with anxiety and PTSD is EMDR therapy. And my aim today is to give you a thorough understanding of what EMDR therapy is, how it works, who it's for, how it's conducted, how it's measured, what it costs, what the benefits are, and realistically how long it takes to achieve desired results. So I've got some notes here so that I don't forget to cover all of those. And as Julie mentioned, I haven't got PowerPoint slides. I am just going to be talking through the topic, and we'll have the recording as a resource for you at the end. So I'm going to tell you as much as I know about EMDR, and then we can have a Q&A session at the end. So EMDR, what is it? It is an extensively researched, it's not new by any means, and highly effective psychotherapy tool, proven to help people recover from PTSD, trauma, and other distressing life experiences. It's recommended by the National Institute for Clinical Excellence and also the World Health Organization for the treatment of PTSD and anxiety. Before I really go into EMDR itself, I'd like to just talk about trauma for a moment and really clarify what trauma is. Trauma is when we experience very stressful events that are difficult to cope with, which leave a lasting result. And there are three main types of trauma. I think we can often think, oh, PTSD, that's for the armed forces, but really it is obviously, but not just that. So there are three main types of trauma. There is firstly acute trauma. Acute trauma is caused by a single incident. So for example, an accident, an attack. It could be a one-off incident that leaves such a lasting change to someone's life. So that's acute trauma, it's a one-off incident. Secondly, we have chronic trauma, and this is caused by repeated and prolonged events. So for example, domestic abuse. If you're living in a home and you are subject to physical or mental abuse constantly, ongoing, it chips away at you and it becomes chronic trauma. So it's a prolonged trauma. And then we have complex trauma. And complex trauma is whereby a multitude of stressful events have occurred over time. So for example, we could suddenly lose a loved one, and it's a complete shock and it turns our life upside down. And then we could lose our job, and we could be unemployed for a while, and then we could become unwell, and then something else might happen. And it's these multitude, it's kind of layers of stress that lead to complex trauma. And trauma usually leads to anxiety. And I want to clarify this as well, because we can often think of anxiety as a mental disorder, when really it relates to our nervous system, and our nervous system is located in our body. So anxiety is present when we don't feel safe to relax. Okay, so that's trauma, an overview of trauma. Let me talk to you about how we naturally process trauma. and traumatic events in our lives, because we all go through traumatic experiences. You can't avoid them. We're all born with a capacity to cope with stress. So say, for example, that's our capacity. All right, that's what we have. And that's our capacity to cope with anything that comes our way, anything life throws at us. Now, when a challenging event occurs, we process that challenge, that stress, in a number of ways, naturally. Number one, we think about it. We think and think and think and think about this thing that's happened. And what we're doing by thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it is we're coming to terms mentally with what's happened. Okay, so we are cognitively coming to terms with it. We also hopefully talk about it. We talk about this stressful event, maybe with a partner or family or friends or a therapist. And by talking about it, we are, again, we're getting used to the idea that this thing has happened, and we're cognitively processing, this stressful thing has happened, I'm starting to come to terms with it. We also, through sleep, dream. Dreaming is another way that we process stress. But we have to reach the dream state in order to process. And also we go through a phase of sleep, which is our deep healing phase of sleep, which is rapid eye movement, REM sleep. So you've probably heard of it. And this phase of sleep, what happens is our eyes are going like this under the eyelids. And this motion of bilateral movement is the way that we process our emotions. So this is all happening automatically. So rapid eye movement, the point of it is to process our emotions. Now, the problem is, if we don't want to think about the thing that's happened, if we don't want to talk about the thing that's happened, or we don't feel safe to talk about it, or we're very young and we don't know how to manage this event, or we're not sleeping, then, or maybe even just this thing is too big for us to process, then what happens is, after it's known to be 3 months, if we don't process that event within 3 months, the emotions that we have experienced, so fear, guilt, shame, whatever it is, those emotions will hook into the nervous system permanently, and that becomes part of us as we move forward. And we're also left with a story, a belief that maybe life's unfair, or these bad things happen to me, or I'm a bad person, or whatever it is. It becomes part of our makeup, and our capacity gets less and less and less. And when our capacity becomes very small, we find it very difficult to cope with life. We feel overwhelmed. We might find ways to manage that. So we might find we'll reach for coping mechanisms because we're very clever. So we might reach for food, we might reach for alcohol, we might turn to drugs, we might buy loads of stuff that we don't need. We'll find ways to kind of temporarily make us feel better and safer, and that we're in control somehow. But and don't get me wrong, some coping mechanisms are really helpful. I've described ones that could lead to addiction, and our capacity then becomes absolutely not only nil, but we then have another layer of problem to deal with. But coping mechanisms, helpful ones, would be things like meditation, relaxation, exercise, talk therapy. There are many things that we can do, and I offer these things, and basically the reason, well, I'll come on to that in a moment, the reason why I discovered EMDR therapy and why I believe in it so much. But the thing with talk therapy is it's brilliant to process things that are happening now. It helps you come to terms with and process stuff that's going on in your life now. It also helps to talk about the past. That's very helpful. I believe in talk therapy. I'm a big fan of it. However, I offer talk therapy and have offered talk therapy for many years and will continue to do that. But the limitation with talk therapy is talk therapy helps us come to terms with something cognitively, mentally. It doesn't affect the nervous system. It doesn't heal the nervous system. And actually anxiety is within the nervous system. So things like meditation, yoga, breathing, all of these things are great. They will temporarily give us relief and be helpful, but they won't rid the nervous system of these unhelpful stories that we're holding about life and being triggered. This is the problem, is that although we might be coping with life on the surface, if we then get triggered, it's our nervous system that is stimulated and saying, you're not safe because something else has happened in life. And it takes us backwards. So what we really want to do is heal the nervous system. We want our capacity back. That's what we want, so that we can cope. And this is why I got into EMDR therapy, because I had a couple of long-term talk therapy clients, and they had both been through, actually both of them had been through childhood sexual abuse. And talk therapy and all of the different tools and techniques that we tried helped them to cope. They helped them to feel better, but they didn't stop them getting triggered. They didn't fully heal. And I felt really frustrated. And I heard about EMDR therapy. And as often these things happen, I was in a group situation, and a lady that was part of the group, who I knew quite well, said, oh, I'm just on the train back from an EMDR therapy course. I might lose signal. And so my ears pricked up, and I was thinking, wow, maybe I can pass these clients to this lady. And I spoke to her, and she said, well, why don't you talk to the guy that taught me? He's fantastic. And that took me on. Then I got in touch with him and did the training, and I've never looked back. EMDR therapy is so effective. So let me tell you a bit more about it. Okay, so what is EMDR therapy? What does it stand for? EM stands for eye movement. So, you know, I spoke earlier about rapid eye movement. EM stands for eye movement. D stands for desensitization. So through the process, we desensitize the emotions, because we're working on the nervous system. We're working on the level of emotions, feelings. So we desensitize the intensity of those feelings. R stands for reprocessing, and we are reprocessing old unprocessed trauma, which wasn't processed at the time, wasn't fully processed at the time. So EMDR recreates rapid eye movement to reprocess old trauma and desensitize intense emotions. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Please just make notes of anything you want to ask, and we'll cover all of that later. So each therapist will have their own method of working, and I found this actually learning the process was one thing. Then as a therapist, it's deciding how am I going to conduct that to be most effective. So each therapist is going to have their own methods. I can only speak for the way that I work, but my way is to tackle any stored trauma. So for example, somebody might come to me because they have a phobia, or because they suddenly they just can't get in the car and drive. So there's something that has brought them to me, and they look at it as it's this one thing. And fine, we could just process that one thing. But really, my chosen method is to tackle and identify any stressful events that have happened in the past that still hold some sort of emotional charge. So rather than dealing with the tip of the iceberg, we're looking at the whole picture. So the way that I work is that the first session I have with a client would be a 2-hour session, if they can cope with a 2-hour session. Most people can. And that first 2-hour session will identify any past stressful events that the client can recall. And we kind of start mapping out this, we start building a picture on paper. It's great for self-awareness, because often we can forget what's happened in the past. We can sweep it under the carpet, but this kind of brings to light anything that has happened that has felt really challenging to that client. We then look at what are the emotions, what are the feelings that come up when we talk about each of these events. So it might be I was bullied at school, maybe. I was bullied at school, and that brings up such feelings of fear and shame and embarrassment. And God, when I think about it, I feel red in the face, and I feel my stomach flip. And then we start to get into the level of the body. Where do you feel this emotion? You're feeling it in your stomach, you're feeling it's coming up in your face. And this is really great awareness. So we and also what stories come up when we think of that event. Well, okay, when I was bullied at school, I took on this belief that there's something wrong with me, that I'm not enough, or I'm weird, or whatever it is. There's a story that's stuck. So we map all of this out, and then we start to in future sessions. So the first session is 2 hours, and again, this is just how I work. Future sessions, 1 hour, and we start to work our way through these events, and we work through the emotions, and we desensitize them through recreating rapid eye movement. So as we bring up each event, and we talk about the emotions, and we talk about the feelings in the body, I recreate rapid eye movement for the client, and this helps them to process. Now, it might sound a bit odd, but there's something to do with its bilateral stimulation. So we're going from what I don't want to feel anymore to what I do want to feel. The old belief that I'm holding to the belief that actually I want to move forward with. We're starting to move from the past to the present, and this is kind of unconsciously. That's the process. And the client feels the level of emotion come down in their body. And as that happens, as we recreate REM, wisdom starts to come through. So maybe a new insight about that past event. Maybe it was like, actually that was never about me. That bullying was never about me. It was about someone that was really unkind or jealous or whatever it was. It was never actually about me. And so that old belief that there's something wrong with me, the client can let go of that and move into this new knowledge that actually I realise now that wasn't true at all. So yeah, start to create a more helpful story about life. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Who can benefit from EMDR therapy? So my experience of it so far is that anyone who is experiencing anxiety or overwhelm, because anxiety and overwhelm are usually present due to the nervous system being overloaded with old unprocessed emotions and unhelpful stories. You would have to be able to feel your emotions to benefit from EMDR therapy. And that might sound an odd thing to say. And I've had one client so far who had learnt to dissociate so much from their emotions that bringing up emotions weren't possible. And so we had to find a different route for that person. But most people can feel an emotion. So basically you need to be able to feel an emotion, and although we typically work with eye movement, there are some people that can't either move their eyes in that way. Maybe if someone has epilepsy or pain behind their eyes or something, or even somebody that has no eyesight, we can use clicking or tapping. So there are other ways than eye movement. Really, the key thing is the bilateral stimulation. So basically, if you have anxiety to whatever degree, and you suffer from overwhelm, and you feel that you can't cope with life, and you feel emotion, then I would say you're a candidate for EMDR therapy. What are the benefits? Let's talk about the benefits. So EMDR therapy does not obviously change what's happened in the past, but it does change the way that you feel about what's happened. So rather than it being this crushing event, it becomes, this thing happened. It's part of my history. It's part of my tapestry. I've learnt this from it. Yeah, it was really difficult at the time. Yes, maybe if I sit and think about it, it's pretty sad. But it doesn't trigger in the same way. Yeah, so things that would previously trigger a client just no longer, it just doesn't hold that charge. And it also gives you back the capacity to cope. Okay, so they're the main benefits. I saw recently, I don't know if you saw, but Earl Spencer, so Princess Diana's brother, I think he has an autobiography coming out, and he was in the news quite a bit, and on BBC One maybe, talking about on the news. Anyway, I saw a clip, and he was talking about his traumatic childhood, and particularly when he was at boarding school, he suffered physical, sexual abuse, and also he was lied to. And he was recalling, he was talking about EMDR therapy and how much it's helped him. So using him as an example, he recalled an event where he knew he was being lied to, and looking back, it triggered him so much. And when he thought about that, he felt rage, and he could see everything, he could see colours and reds, and it felt really totally overwhelming. And he had EMDR therapy, and after the session of reprocessing this event, he said the next session the therapist said, oh, how do you feel about this event now? And he said, rather than this kind of total overwhelm of emotion, he just recalled it. It happened. This thing happened, and it just didn't hold that charge anymore. He was also talking about how EMDR therapy has helped him give up drinking. So there are so many benefits to EMDR therapy. Okay, so I've covered how it's conducted. Let me talk about how it's measured. So how do we measure EMDR therapy? Well, in the first session with a client, or even before the first session, I want to understand what that person wants to achieve. So what is the objective of our time together? What do you want to change, or how do you want to feel as a result of these sessions? And that becomes our measure. So for example, let me just think of a couple of clients. So one lady was unable to get in the car and drive. She'd had a panic attack whilst driving, and she just could not get in the car, and this has gone on for a long time. She was only maybe 40, and she was unable to drive to work. She was unable to take her children places. It was very life limiting. She wanted to be able to get behind the wheel again. So that was our objective. And that was achieved. So that objective is our measure, and that is the measure that I return to each session. It's like, okay, are we any closer to this, or are we there? Then we know that we've reached the end of that time. How many sessions are required? Okay, now this is a tricky one to answer across the board, because if you Google how many sessions are required, I think it says 20, 30, something which does not relate to my experience. I average 6 sessions. That's my average number of sessions, including that first 2-hour session. So I think I've had one client that needed 4 sessions. Some people might need 5. Most people will need around 6. So there are no guarantees. Some people need 7, some might need 8. That's my experience. But that might be very different for other therapists. And how much will it cost? Okay, so this is another, if you Google it, it says £70 to £120 per session, apparently, is the average in the UK. I don't charge that much personally. I charge for the 2-hour session, I charge £110, and then for 1-hour sessions I charge £65, and I feel that that's a fair exchange. EMDR therapy is more expensive than talk therapy because the therapist has had more training. That's what you're paying for. It's a specialist service that you're paying for, so you are going to pay more. But this at least enables me to say to a client or a potential client at the outset, I can't guarantee how many sessions you're going to need, but I can tell you you'll probably need 6, maybe, and it's going to cost you a few £100s. You're going to need to invest a few £100s and be committed to that, because it's really not worth dipping your toe in for 1 or 2 sessions. It's just not worth it. So that would be something I'd really make sure that this person was all in, because I'm all in and they need to be all in, and then we work together towards that same objective. So yeah, you need to be able to feel emotion, you need to be able to fully commit. I'm just going to touch upon one other area before we move on to Q&As, which is what happens if resistance shows up, because this can happen. So I've experienced this several times, and this led me to take another course, which is something called parts therapy. So as we're processing through EMDR, there can be a part of the person who is really resisting the healing. A part is really resisting the change. They don't want to go there, but they do. I mean, I have to keep in mind they do, because they're turning up, they're paying the money, they want this thing to work. Why are they resisting? But it's a part of them that is resisting, and that part of them, what we discover then, we can do a session of parts therapy, which I'm not going to go into too much because we're not talking about parts therapy today. But sometimes there is a part of us that develops in a traumatic circumstance. We might develop a coping mechanism that is really helpful at the time, but it's not actually helpful to take forward with us. And part of us wants to hold on to that because it's worked in the past. And through parts therapy, which is under hypnosis, we can identify, okay, which part is resisting, what's the fear, and how can we resolve that, so we can integrate the 2 parts of the person so they can move forward fully into a healthier future. So I just want to kind of mention that, because that does sometimes show up. So they're the main points that really I wanted to talk about. I mean, I can go into detail about how the brain works and why the nervous system is triggered in the way it is and all of that, but I think I'd like to really come to questions and answers and answer anything that you have before doing.